Welcome to Tyrompers No Limit Podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to Tyrompers No Limit Podcast. This is episode number 62. And boys and girls, I have a fun one for you. If you can't tell by looking at this man right here, Jordan, he has the world's number one ranked beard, obviously. But this is a man that also has a PhD in sports history, which I think is the coolest PhD I've ever heard of. He's taught sport history and sports philosophy for 7+ years. He's published works on sports and national identity. He now runs the Phya Academy in a coaching and consulting agency working with individuals, athletes, teams, and coaches. And today, guys, we're going to get into some of that. We're also going to get into his favorite sports stories and most inspiring sports stories. I'm going to share a couple of mine too, kind of go back and forth on that. This is a man I'm just really excited to introduce. One of my favorite follows on Twitter. I'm going to link all his stuff below. Please give him a follow. And what's up, Mr. Jordan Goldstein? Welcome to the pod. How you doing, brother?
I am doing so great, Tyler. Thank you so much for having me. It's truly an honor to be here, and I'm just excited to talk about sports, the positivity that they can bring, and especially the inspiration that some of these stories can provide us in our lives.
I think it's so cool, man. You could, even as a young boy, you have these sports icons, these heroes you can look up to. I think in team sports, you learn a lot about life. And so I'm always a big proponent of sports, man. And first, can you just tell me, how'd you get a PhD in sports history? How does one go about that, man? I would have loved college if I knew this was a thing. So I didn't even know this was a thing, man.
It's kind of a weird, strange story. So I'm a historian. So I grew up in like the history department of the university. But I was always really interested in the question, like, where do national sports come from? Like, I'm Canadian. I'm wearing my Team Canada hockey jersey right now. It's like, why are we so obsessed with this sport? And why do people around the world identify us with this sport? For Americans, it's like historically been baseball or American football, like Brazilians with soccer, New Zealanders with rugby, people in India and Pakistan with cricket. Like, what is it about these sports and why do they take root in these communities? And then how do they come to express themselves as these like national plays? In the history departments, they look at sport as this silly diversion. It's like, you really want to study that? That stuff's not important. Like, let's talk about like the wars, the politics, or like the diplomats or the presidents, right? They don't care about culture so much. And if it is culture, it's like literature, it's drama and art, right? It's these high cultural activities, not like debauched, low base sports, right? Which is for the rabble, for the lower class. Like there's this dichotomy. So you can't study sport in the history departments, but you can study sport in kinesiology departments, or what they used to call physical education departments. So there's this little sub niche of historians who have carved out a space in these physical education or kinesiology programs where they can study sport history. So I actually have my PhD is in kinesiology, even though I couldn't even identify 95% of the muscles or ligaments on an anatomical figure of a body. So that kind of just interest and curiosity in why people place such an importance on sport and identity, that just drove me to want to study it. And I'm just a historian and intellectual guy, and I just forged my own path in the university to be able to study what I wanted and to be able to produce the type of research and the information that I was after.
That's so cool, brother. That's really inspiring too, to just kind of say, hey, I'm going to carve my own path of what interests me. Because I always think like that was probably my biggest thing, like with school, looking back, is like I studied things that didn't interest me. And now that I'm out of school, I'm an avid reader, I'm an avid studier, but it's always things that interest me. And I think, if you could give some wisdom to anybody out there listening, it's like, find things that really interest you. And then it doesn't even feel like you're working or studying. You're interested. You want to learn about these things. So that's cool. I have a theory. Can you answer this maybe real quick before we get started? But I have a theory that we're so into sports because, up until a few hundred years ago, right? Like it was like, my warring tribe is going to go conquer this other warring tribe. And now like sports has almost replaced that. Like, hey man, I can feel like really passionate around the Las Vegas Golden Knights. That's my tribe, right? And we're not going to go like invade, the San Jose Sharks. We're just going to play a sporting match, but we can all cheer and rah, kind of how we used to. Is that some of what's behind it and why it's so popular?
Yes. I mean, humans are tribal by nature. We love to break ourselves up into group. We love to have one color for my group, another color for your group, and we love to go at each other. Like competition is at the heart of our societies. It's at the heart of the way we relate to each other, especially as groups. And yeah, there's a lot of theories about like where sport comes from. And one of the ones I subscribe to is that it comes directly out of war, right? Some people call it a substitute for war. Some people say it's the same thing as war. And I tend to think of it's the second. It's the same. Sport and war are the same thing. They're expressed differently. One is played for higher stakes. You could say war is like the ultimate sport. But they're the same impulse. They're the same. They give us similar values. When you participate in sport and war, you gain the same types of virtues. And even historically speaking, the ancient Greeks, the classical Greeks, the ones who gave us the idea of organized sports, just to have organized sports, they practiced warfare in a way that is much more like a game and a sport than we would imagine warfare today. Like when we think about war, we think total war. We think destroy my opponent, destroy the enemy, no matter what. We don't think about like, we have this idea of rules of war, but nobody follows them. The ancient Greeks actually had rules of war, and they were like, meet on a plain field, so no side has an advantage of height, come with the exact same numbers, so no one has numerical advantage, come with the exact same weaponry and armor so that nobody has a technological superiority over each other. You're going to actually advance towards each other at the exact same speed so that there's not a momentum advantage. And we're just going to meet in the middle, and we're going to let the best win. And it's going to be quick, it's going to be decisive, it's going to be over, and we're going to accept the results. And it's like, well, shoot, that kind of sounds like a sport to me.
Yeah. Wow. That's pretty wild, man. I didn't know that back in the day. I feel very interesting to study, man. I could just talk to you all day about probably the things that you've learned from studying this stuff back in the day. But I do want to hop into it because you had said, hey, man, I have a couple of just events that I really want to highlight that have made the biggest impact or can impact other people. So do you want to start out by sharing maybe one of those too?
Yeah, absolutely. So the stories I want to share today, they are Canadian stories. I'm going to be a little bit of a flag waver here. And they're two of the most inspiring individual athletes that I believe this country has ever produced. One is a name that people might recognize, and the first is a name that most people probably will not recognize. So the first story I want to talk about today is Ned Hanlan. All right. Ned Hanlan was Canada's very first world champion in any sport. He was the world single scull, so rowing, champion 5 years in a row from 1880 to 1884. So for me, that's pretty cool. He's the first guy from my country to sort of make it big on the international stage. But what I love about his story is how creative he is. And essentially, he was able to outcompete people who are bigger and stronger than him by using his brain and by using his creativity and his wit. So he basically invented the way everybody rows today. So he was a huge innovator. So if for people out there who know about rowing, you know that you row on a sliding seat. If you've maybe never been in a boat, but you've gone to the gym and you've seen a rowing machine, you know that you're pushing back and forth. He was the very first person to utilize the sliding seat to get his whole body into the action. So he's a small guy. He's like less than 5'9". He's 150 pounds. When you think about rowers, what do you think of? Like giants, 6'3", 6'4", wide across the chest, huge. And that's what it was. Those were the champions back in his day. But they didn't use the sliding seat the way he did. They just used their upper body.
Wow.
And so he's putting his full body. So every time he's going, he is blasting people out of the water. He has a record in competition, 300 races. He won 294 of them. And he's like the smallest, weakest competitor out there, right? So really it's like he was able to combine like a daring new style to upend the way that people thought you had to do this motion or this movement, And he also shattered the belief that you've got to be the biggest, the strongest person in order to win. And what he did was actually quite dangerous. Like those shells, if you've ever been in one of those rowing boats, they're not very wide. They're pretty rickety. So if you don't have complete control of your body in terms of balance and coordination, you're tipping over. Like they wouldn't even allow novices to use the sliding seat because they were just so obviously just going to tip over. And so that's the story that I wanted to share first off, because I think for a lot of us, we root for the underdog in sport, right? We want to see the little guy win. We want to see the one that nobody thought was gonna be the winner. We want to see them triumph. And he's just such a great example of this in terms of like stature, but also like this idea of being creative, right? Trying something new, and then in the result, and the result of that, changing the entire game forever. And I just find those stories incredibly inspiring. And they actually made a movie about Ned Hanlan. Starred Nicolas Cage. It's a 1986 movie called The Boy in Blue. I've never seen it, but I was just doing a little digging. So if anybody out there wants to get the Hollywood version of the Ned Hanlan story,
I have to check that out, man. That's a really cool thing. And I think a couple points when you bring that up, how neat it is. And I bet he was mocked at first, right? Like, hey, this guy, like whenever you do new things, you're innovative, or well, why are you doing it that way? This is the way we've always done it. There's always a lot of friction and a lot of pushback against that. And so I bet that was very like, he had to overcome a lot of obstacles, a lot of people telling him, you can't do this. These guys are bigger, they're stronger, whatever. But he had that vision in his mind of, I know I can do this. That's so inspiring to me, man, too, to hear stories like that. And then, you mentioned rooting for the underdog. I think of you in Canada. Like I grew up, NCAA basketball fan, and Gonzaga used to be the underdog. Now they're like a perennial powerhouse, man. But yeah, I always remember rooting for Gonzaga because they were always like this 12, 13, 14 seed when I was growing up, but they always found ways to win, right? And now they're a national powerhouse. You can't call them an underdog anymore. But man, that's always like some of the best memories. I remember rooting for those 14 seeds, man, to come knock off the Giants,
100%. Up in Canada, we used to cheer in the 90s, we cheer on Steve Nash. He played for Santa Clara College. Yeah, I think they came from the same conference actually as Gonzaga. But yeah, cheer for the underdog. That's why we love things like the tournament, right? Because they give us those Cinderella stories. So
that's right, man. Shout out my boy Brian Deviduke. I bet he watches this. He lives up in Lethbridge, Canada. The last time I was in Canada with him, we were there for the Vancouver Winter Games, and we actually stumbled into what we thought was a bar. It was Steve Nash's. It was called like Steve Nash's something. Turns out it was a gym. So we were pretty we were pretty hammered, and we walked into this place thinking we were going to get a pub. Turns out Steve Nash owns a chain of gyms, not a chain of pubs. So last time we were there, man. But I love that story. Thanks for sharing, man. That's pretty cool. One I wanted to highlight and get your kind of take on too, man. And this is one that I think you're friends with Alex on Twitter too, right? My boy Alex Hart. He's the editor for this channel. I love that guy to death. And he wrote a nice thread, which I thought was cool. And then I kind of dug into it more on Ted Williams. And back in the day, man, where, he had the 400 average, and going into the last game, he was, everybody was telling him, hey, man, you should sit out. You're the only guy that will have this 400 average. You shouldn't risk it. And, and I think the more I read about that story and the more I read about who Ted Williams was, and it's more of like, I don't know, to me, it's this nostalgic thing of how it used to be. He was like, look, I'm not going to let my team down, number one. Like, it's not about Ted Williams. It's about the name on the jersey, right? I'm not. And now, like in the NBA, you'll see these guys that'll say, like, I won't even heave the half court shot at the end of the quarter because it'll hurt my shooting percentage, And I just think what a shift that's become. And I think it was so pure back then that it was just for the love of the game, maybe not the endorsements, maybe not all the things that come with being a professional athlete nowadays. Where you kind of have to guard this image, right? These guys didn't really have that back then. They just played because they absolutely loved the game. And I think for him to go out and get a couple hits that last game and then, up the average to even higher, I get chills when I was reading that story and reading some of the quotes from his teammates and just the kind of guy he was, man. I thought that was cool. Do you have any thoughts on that one or any takeaways too?
I love that. I love that example. And there's a lot of things that sort of have changed between, when Ted Williams was a star and the stars of our day. There's just so much money now in sports that people get into them for a completely different reason. And Yeah, what that says to me is that there are the athletes that we admire are the ones who do it for a duty or for an obligation, or they feel like they have a responsibility to the game or to something that's bigger than themselves, right? And we just don't see that enough in the athletes of our time right now, because they're focusing on themselves. They're focusing on endorsements, on contracts, on extracting from the business of sport. And sport has become such a massive business that it's hard to fault the players in a sense, because everything in the sports industry is telling them this is what you should be focusing on. You do still get those rare individuals who seem to be able to rise above it, and those are the ones that stand so clearly in our minds as the type of athletes we want to see emulated. I want to see more of that character type. But there's the other thing is risk. Like, sports are an arena to test risk, right? Like, going back to that idea of sport and war, the same thing. Like, sport is a lot, if you gain the same things from sport and war, well, sport's a lot less risky than war, but it's still dependent upon a type of a risk. It's a risk to your physical health. It's a risk to your reputation if you lose, or if you don't perform up to your ability, like you choke. Now everyone's going to know you as the person who couldn't perform under pressure. Like, there's a lot at stake. And so, like, the Ted Williams story just tells us that the true athlete understands the risk and still takes it, as opposed to playing it safe, right? In terms of securing a legacy. I wasn't going to tell this story, but it's a perfect one. Like, one of my favorite stories from the ancient Greek world centers around a pancrationist named Arrhichion. Pancration is like ancient mixed martial arts. So there's only two rules. There's only two things you can't do in pancration: no eye gouging and no biting. Otherwise, everything's fair.
Good.
Everything's fair game. So this guy, I'll try and make it quick. This guy wanted to be an undefeated champion at the Olympics. That was like his dream. He wins 2 Olympics, and he's now back at his 3rd. He's in the final match. He's going for that third crown. He's losing. He's being strangled. And it's not like the strangling that you see in mixed martial arts today. It's like strangled to death strangling. Like, he's literally about to expire. He's about to tap out. He sees his trainer, the legend goes, and the trainer yells out to him, "What a noble epitaph, he who never was defeated at Olympia." For those who don't know what an epitaph is, that's like the saying that goes on your tombstone. It sort of sums up your life. And so he's like, oh, okay, I kind of realize what I've got to do in this moment. In his last breath, he grabs the toe of his opponent, snaps it, breaks it, and then he dies. But at the same time he dies, the opponent taps out because of the pain of breaking his toe. So we've got this incredible scene. We've got somebody who gave up but is alive versus somebody who didn't, who is dead. Who's going to be the champion? I think you kind of know where this is going. The crowd picks up the corpse of Arrhichion, raise him up, give him the olive wreath, which is the signal, which is like the trophy that you get, and they proclaim him the champion. And my favorite part of the story is they describe this other person as, they don't even bother telling us his name. Like, he's not even important enough to be remembered because he chose to quit, as opposed to Arrhichion, who just went that extra little bit, right? Just like sort of Ted Williams took on that extra little bit of risk. And now his reputation is, I'm talking to you now, 2,600 years later about him. So, like, that's a very extreme example, but Ted Williams personifies that idea of risking it all for basically like the glory of the game.
Yeah, man. Wow. I got chills as you're telling that story. That's a really, thanks for sharing that, man. That is really cool. And I think I can resonate with, if I think of the modern day athletes now, it's like a guy like Kobe Bryant, who would play hurt, who would go out there and say, you know what, man, yeah, they would say, hey, Kobe, you're going against, there's a legendary story, you're going against Vince Carter tonight, and he's going to embarrass you, man. Like, you got a hurt ankle. You should sit this one out. And like, Kobe's like, that's not who I am, man. Like, I will go out, I'll go out there and compete, because there's might be a kid that will never get a chance to see Kobe Bryant again. And I want to put on that show for him, and like that kind of warrior mentality, I think, goes back to that kind of that war and sports correlation, man. And that's what I think of. Yeah. Rest in peace to Kobe. And what was our man's name too? Our
Arrhichion.
Yeah. I'm going to do a deep dive on him at some point. That sounds like a very cool one to research, man.
Yeah. I'll hook you up. Don't worry.
Nice, man. Well, do you have another one you want to share too?
Yeah, I got another one for sure. So, in my estimation, the story I'm about to share might be the greatest example of what I call athletic heroism, which is sort of like it's like an idea that I created out of my research into the history and the philosophy and teaching sport. And basically, it's this idea that you combine body, mind, and spirit into one endeavor to aim at moral and spiritual excellence, right? And that's what sport does. It forces us to combine everything that we've got into one great play. And then if we're doing it right, we're going to inspire tremendous change and impact the world. And so the other story that I want to talk about is Terry Fox. Have you heard of the name Terry Fox before, Ty?
I have, yeah, I have, but I'm not super familiar with details.
So Terry Fox is a young Canadian. He lived in like the 1970s and the 1980s, and he was an aspiring like gym teacher. So he's an athletic guy. But when he's 20 years old, he's diagnosed with cancer. He ends up having to have his one of his legs amputated below the knee. He goes through 18 months of chemotherapy and he's placed in a children's cancer ward.
Sure.
He's cleared, right? He eventually goes into remission and he gets to leave. But I want to read you a quote from Terry Fox before I tell you what he did to show you this idea of like sacrifice and heroism and struggle. So as he was in this cancer ward with all these other children, it's like the most depressing place and the most sad, like the saddest place in the world, right? So here's what he sort of endeavored to do himself once he knew he was getting out. So I'm going to quote him right now. So these are Terry Fox's words. I soon realized that they would only be that would only be half of my quest, meaning getting over my own illness. That's only half of what he's supposed to do. For as I went through 16 months of the physically and emotionally draining ordeal of chemotherapy, I was rudely awaked by the feelings that surrounded and coursed through the cancer clinic. There were faces with the brave smiles and the ones who had given up smiling. There were feelings of hopeful denial and the feelings of despair. My quest would not be a selfish one. I could not leave knowing these faces and feelings would still exist, even though I would be set free from mine. Somewhere the hurting must stop, and I was determined to take myself to the limit for the cause. It's an incredible quote. So what was this crazy thing that he was going to do? He was going to run a marathon every single day, starting at the very eastern part of Canada and going all the way across the country. A marathon each day. And this is a man who's doing it on a prosthetic leg. So every single time, and you can just look at it on YouTube, look at the videos, his run cadence, it is awkward, right? But he had been training and that was his goal. He didn't tell anybody he was going to do it, didn't tell his parents because they would obviously try to stop him. And so he started what became to be known as the Marathon of Hope. Initially, he wanted to raise $1 million for cancer research, but then he decided to up his goal to $24 million, which would have been the equivalent of $1 per Canadian. So if everybody in Canada just gave $1 to him, he would be able to raise $24 million for cancer research. He started his Marathon of Hope on the 12th of April in 1980. He had to stop on the 2nd of September. He went from the east coast of Canada to basically like Thunder Bay, which is like Lake the very west side of Lake Superior. He ran 5,373 kilometers.
Dude.
Which is what, like 3,000 miles?
Yeah.
Right?
That's
again
wild.
26.2 every single day, right? But then he had to stop because the cancer had returned. It was in his lungs. He never came back out of the hospital. He died in 1981. When he stopped, he had raised 1.7 million, but a year later, he had reached the goal basically of $23 million raised for cancer research.
Wow.
And what's truly, I mean, like it's an amazing story. But a couple years later, there was a foundation that was created called the Terry Fox Foundation. And every year they host the Terry Fox Run, which is completed all across the world It's massive in Canada. Everybody does it. It's like in every single school, but the United States, countries all over the world will do the Terry Fox Run. And it's the only charity run that has no corporate sponsorships, because Terry Fox refused corporate sponsorships because he didn't want people to think, oh, he's doing it for the money or he's doing it for fame. He wanted to keep it as pure as possible so that nobody could ever go after his motivations. And so the Terry Fox Run is no corporate sponsorships. It's a 5-kilometer run. Anybody can do it. There is no time. You can walk, you can go be pushed in a wheelchair. My uncle rollerbladed it one time.
That's cool.
Like, it doesn't even matter. You can, like, the point is that everybody goes, and that you do it for somebody who's connected to you, who's suffering from cancer. And since the foundation was created in, I believe it was 1988, they've raised $750 million.
$750 million?
$750 million for cancer, for cancer research. And you want to talk about somebody who didn't have to do any of that, somebody who didn't have to take on any of that physical suffering or pain, running one marathon alone. I know you just ran a marathon, eh?
I did 100K steps in a day, so it was
Oh, okay. It's a lot, right?
2 marathons in a day, but it was walking.
Yeah, he would walk a bunch, like, in the afternoons. Like, he would run a lot in the mornings.
Man, after, I can't imagine like the 4th week when you're like, I mean, you add up those miles. Man.
And remember, he's doing this on one leg too. So he's hobbling on a prosthetic as well, and
crazy.
All the pain he's experiencing, let alone when the cancer comes back, right? Like, so if there's one story of one athlete who I just think embodies all of the positive things that I believe sport brings to us as societies, but also as for individuals, I just can't think of a better representation than Terry Fox. Like, it's heroic, it's brave, it's courageous, it's inspiring, it's motivational, it's selfless, it's grueling, it's demanding, it's just everything. And it's
like the best of humanity right there, and I think that point you made, if he didn't really have to do that, and I think that shows too the power and the impact of what one person can have when they have that, like, on fire vision, and like, I don't care the cost, I'm going for this thing, and it's kind of bigger than yourself. It sounds like that was really the case, man. And wow, to 750 million. I mean, we might actually have a cure for cancer someday just because of what he did 30 years ago, right? With all that money and all that research. That's incredible, man. That's an awesome story.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for letting me share it. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, man. So what else do you think? I was going to share another one, but I can't. There's no way I'm topping that. So we're stopping with that one for sure. That's an unbelievable. That really is just so inspiring. You picture a guy like that who just thinks, man, I'm going to go out and change the world in this way. And again, didn't have to. Could have just gone and lived a good life afterwards and tried to heal and focus on himself. But he had that vision bigger than himself. I think that's the best of sports. When you see a guy even sacrificing for a teammate, or I just did a story a month ago about it was a junior high track meet or a cross country meet. And there was a runner and he was kind of having a panic attack. It was his first ever race and he just started too quick and he was freaking out. And his mom and coach and people were seeing him kind of puking and didn't know what to do. And another runner turns the corner and gets down and gives him a fist bump and says, "Get up, man. We can run together. You got this. You got this." And they go run together, man. And that's what sports is about to me. It's not always about the titles or the everything. It's these great moments and the humanity of it that it's almost bigger than you, man. Do you have any other like stories of growing up, maybe playing sports or anything like that you'd want to share? And then I'd also like to get into too, kind of what the academy is and coaching and what you kind of do on a day-to-day basis. So maybe you could hit that afterwards.
Absolutely. Like, there's a lot of things like that pop into my mind. The one image that is sticking right out at me right now comes from the 1992 Barcelona Olympics. And I believe the name, I could be getting this wrong, so I apologize if I do, but I believe it's Derrick Redmond. Have you ever heard that name or the story?
But that's the first Olympics I really remember being super into and watching it all, but that name doesn't ring familiar.
The stories of Derrick Redmond, who I believe it's in the 200 meters, he was a favorite. Like, he was his aspiration was to win the gold medal. So he wasn't just there to like show up, and like being at the Olympics wasn't the victory. He wanted to win the gold. So he's running around the track in the final heat, and right at the beginning, he pulls his hamstring. He's done. It's over for him. But he refuses to stop. He starts hobbling towards the finish line in this obvious agonizing pain. And then something incredible happens. Out of the stands, somebody jumps down and starts running onto the track with him. And it's Derrick Redmond's father.
I've seen that clip. Yeah, man. That's powerful. Yeah.
And so here you have this dad taking his son, who's basically just, his dream is just destroyed right in front of him. And he's going to say, like, we're going to go do this together. We're going to get across that finish line. And you can even see some of the Olympic race officials coming and saying, what are you doing? You can't get off. And the dad's like, get out of here. Get out of here. Don't even bother me. And Derrick he's beside himself. He's sobbing and he's in pain. And it's like the worst moment, but it's like the worst moment in his career, but it's one of the most inspiring moments you would ever hope to ever see at any sporting event. You know, this bond between the father and son, the generations coming together through the shared struggle of competition, the humanity of wanting to finish what you've started, even though it's gone absolutely horrible. And it's the opposite outcome of what you thought, right? That's how you honor the game. That's how you do something that's bigger than yourself, right? Like, nobody remembers who won that gold medal.
Yeah.
Everybody if you were watching it, everybody remembers that incredibly dramatic and powerful moment of a father and a son finishing a dream that they had obviously started a long time ago together, and doing it in a way that was almost more powerful than winning, right? It shows us that sometimes losing is almost better to teach us the things that we need, as opposed to winning. So when you're talking about like the humanity of sports and how it brings out our best, like, that to me is one of the best moments, because it's in such a moment of despair, right? Where you would think, where's the positive that could possibly come out of this? Well, it's right there in front of you and you can't deny it. So that's the other image that just like flashed right in my mind.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And again, a lot of parallels from, I think, life too, of how you kind of mentioned that sometimes our worst failures, I always say, we need to teach our kids, and I try and imprint this upon my young kids even already, is that you don't really ever fail. You learn, and it's I think sports is such an awesome teacher for that, because it's so cool to me, thinking back to my childhood, some of the grit that I had to develop was playing against guys that were bigger than me, but having to, you get that chip on your shoulder, you get that thing, and you fail, you get beat down, but man, you learn to train harder, come back better. And, I don't know that many people that are, I have a good buddy, John Edmondson, shout out to him if he watches this, but he's a big high up in a company, right? And he always tells me, I want to hire athletes. I want to hire people that competed in sports, competed in team sports. They know how to communicate. They know how to fail and get better. They know how to, a lot of these parallels and a lot of these things take away. And I think that's really cool in life, that a lot of times when you go through a thing that you might think is the hardest thing ever, can actually be one of your best moments in life if you lean into it and grow through it, man. That's really powerful. That's cool. Thanks for sharing that, man.
No problem. I love sharing these stories. I used to do it all the time in my classroom, but I don't have one of those anymore. So
well, tell me a little bit about what you're doing now, man. I want to know about Phya Academy and some coaching and some stuff you do around this, man. So can you kind of let people know into that? And I'm going to link your website below, obviously, and we've got your Twitter up, but everybody give this man Jordan a follow, man. He puts out great content, awesome stuff all the time. He also does these long hikes where his beard will freeze. And it's like just the all-time favorite pictures, man.
I wish
can you kind of tell us a little bit about what you're doing with that?
I wish those were just hikes. No, that's me out running. I'm out running in that stuff, like 10 miles through the snow, up and down cliff edges. Like, that's the fun. That's the fun adventure right there. I live for that stuff. I actually can't wait for the snow to start falling up here so I can get back out. It's more like adventure running than it is like even running. But
yeah, more for your mind than for cardio at that point, man.
it's a 100% mental battle. Like, the winner for me is the season to make the mind bulletproof, right? Like, everybody else is complaining, I'm out there getting stronger. Like,
I love that, man. That's such a cool thing.
That's the way I like to do it. So in terms of like what I do, like, it's taking these lessons, it's taking this idea that sport is a powerful force for good, and essentially bringing that to as much of the forefront as possible. So if that's like working with athletes, which I've done, it's getting them to think more about like why they play the sport they do, what they value about it, how it expresses who they are, so that they can essentially throw themselves even more into the activity. If it's a coach, like I work with trainers, I work with coaches so that they can better understand the nature of their own sports, so that they can bring the proper knowledge to help their clients become the best lifters or the best triathletes or the best football players. Because I do believe that each sport speaks to a different person. I believe that each sport requires different virtues and actually generates different virtues. And so if you're a practitioner or if you're a teacher of those sports, the more knowledge that you have of the nature of that sport, the more effective you're going to be coaching it, and the better able you are going to be able to message that to the people that you're leading. So I've worked with athletes, I work with coaches, I work with individuals who want to get back into fitness, but they're not really gung-ho about the gym, or they're not really interested in the typical routes back into leading an active and fit life. So I use stories and I use ideas to help inspire people to get back into shape. What else? Like
That's cool, man. I like that a lot. That's neat.
The knowledge, to me, it's like the knowledge is so fungible to each individual that I believe that I could tailor it to almost anybody in almost any circumstance, because I do believe in this individual power that comes from sport and comes from playing sport, and that comes from living an athletic life. The idea of combining mind, body, and spirit together to search for that idea of moral excellence. I believe that if you're somebody who's really in shape, you could benefit from engaging more with your mind and with your spirit. If you're someone who's out of shape, you could do a lot more with your body, right? So it's about balancing the three together and coming at it from a place where, how do we make sure that whoever you are in whatever capacity have all of those three elements on the same plane with each other, so that you're able to extract the maximum amount of moral value from the activity.
I love that, man. That's really cool. And I think it's cool that we've seen kind of the development of this over the years, where it used to be, back in whatever, these athletes just kind of were there on their own thing, right? But now, like, you're seeing these elite level athletes seeing the value. They all have coaches. They all have, personal nutritionists. They all have that are connecting mind bodies. They all have these high level coaches that are, helping them. And I mean, I think, of course, now that there's so much money in it too, right? Like, you want to gain every little edge you can. And so that's really neat, man, to be able to push that back into people and tell a lot of lessons through that, man. I think I could see where that would be very, very powerful, man. Do you have a recent example of like a big success story or anything?
I've been working with on Twitter, you might have seen him around, is the Ryan Dreyer.
I love Ryan. Yeah, he's an Iron Man, right?
Yeah, he's like the Iron Man. He's the one who got all the lifters to do Iron Man.
Yeah, shout out to Ryan. He's a great dude, man.
Yeah, Ryan's the bomb, and he is like, for as much of like a physical, like how impressive he is physically with what he can do and his knowledge about the body, he is a sharp guy intellectually, and he's incredibly bright. So I've been working with him to essentially extract out the values of triathlon so that he can better communicate to his team members, to his tribe, why it is that they're doing what they're doing, and just sort of amplifying up and essentially deepening the experience that he's able to provide. So it's not just nutrition, it's not just the physical training, it's the moral underpinnings, right, of the values and the lessons you get from doing a sport like triathlon. So it's not just for Ryan's case, we don't just talk about sport. We talk specifically about triathlon. We talk specifically about endurance philosophy. We talk specifically about the importance of competition, showing up on competition day and what that does. And what I was able to help Ryan with was an understanding of basically like the cardinal virtues of sport that the ancient Greeks gave us. They're the ones who gave us this idea of athletics for the sake of athletics, that athletics build our character, that athletics provide us with a space to become a hero, and that athletics provide us with a place to inspire and motivate other people in society to become heroes themselves. So once you arm somebody who's already incredibly knowledgeable about the sport, who's very passionate about it, and who's already delivering success to his clients, there's this incredibly deep level now that Ryan is going to be able to operate on. He's got a language to now communicate his own internal philosophy. I've been able to, just like I was talking to you about the stories of like Arrhichion or Derrick Redmond, I can fill his mind with stories, ideas and concepts. And especially in his case, we focused a lot on the ancient Greeks, but for other clients, I might focus on, say, like the resurgence of athleticism in the 19th century. So muscular Christianity, for example. So if I know trainers are really big into preaching like a spiritual message, we're going to talk about something like that. So it's tailored really to what each client wants. And in the case of Ryan, we were able to do some really cool things over just a few calls.
That's so cool. I feel like what you do too there is like really strengthen that why behind they're doing what they're doing. And I feel like if you don't have that vision mapped out, that's why people fail at a lot of these things, right? Well, I want to get into shape. Well, why? Well, I just want to look a little better. Well, why? Well, and it's like, until for me, I kind of yo-yoed back and forth a little bit until I really decided in my head, my big why is like, dude, I got 2-year-olds and I want to be playing with them 15 years from now, right? So for me, getting up and going to the gym that's a big why for me, right? I want us to have that energy level and stay in shape so that, man, I don't want to be that dad that has to sit on the sidelines, just, well, I'm 50 and 50-year-olds get old. That's what you do, man. I still want to be out there being able to do that with my kids, right? But it sounds like you can really deepen that resolve and that why and kind of concrete that foundation for people to then really kind of go to these higher levels. Because if you don't have that foundational why, it's kind of quicksand, right? And so that's a really powerful thing, man.
1,000%. My foundations, like if we're building the foundational level, my foundation, and you're gonna like this. My foundational level is love. That's what comes first. Love comes first, because if you don't love what it is you're doing, you're not going to go through the hell that you're going to need to in order to succeed. Like, right. Some people think that discipline is at the bottom of like a physical transformation. And I think discipline is like, that's like the second level, right? Because you need discipline to stick on the plan. But think about like that bully coach or that teacher that just used to yell at you to get your work done. It's like, yeah, they're disciplining you, but they're disciplining you like as a punishment. And are you really doing your best work for that coach? Are you really doing your best? No, you're getting results. So yeah, you can get outcomes by being a bully to yourself and just overly disciplining yourself. But are you is it the best version of you? No. The best version of you comes from love. It comes from wanting to go through every single bad feeling that comes along with lifting a heavy weight or having a hard talk in a relationship or whatever that really difficult thing is. It becomes very easy to do and actually becomes something you want to do when you love the process or you're in love with the end goal that you're trying to get. And it makes the discipline a piece of cake. Like you're not like, you're going to the gym in the morning. You're not like, and I'm sure there are days where you're a little bit hard on yourself, but it's not every day. Like probably for you, there's a lot more positive motivation to get to the gym. And that's going to keep you going way more than just, I want to make sure that beer belly doesn't come back or whatever. Like,
right. Yes, 100%, man.
And so love, but also internal drive, internal motivation. This is where a deep understanding of philosophy can help us to stick with difficult transformations, what I call essentially transcendence, right? Where you ascend to a different level. And in doing so, what you've done is smashed the limits that you thought were real. And now you realize, oh, no, the limit's actually way up here. So you transcend a lower part of yourself that was limited to a new version of yourself that is able to aspire towards something even greater related to your true potential, what you should be doing, your best to your best self. So whether it's an individual or a team or coach, that's my two things I focus on, the why, and they both relate to that why. So I really like how you brought that out. It's the internal drive, and it's the idea of love being the engine behind that internal drive.
Man, I love that. That's just beautifully said, man. That's super cool and a really cool framework, I think about that. And I think, what you brought up there too is like why we love sports so much. It's smashing limitations, like, I mean, whether that's personally, man, I never thought, doing 100,000 steps in a day is 53 miles. If you'd have told me I was going to do that, 10 years ago, I would have been like, no, man, that's insane. I'll never do that. And now I'm already looking at the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And I think that's, oh, nobody will ever run a 4-minute mile, it's like it's human beings wanting to be excellent, wanting to be the best versions of themselves. And I think that's what's so cool about sports, and I think how we can learn so much from it. And that's just a beautiful thing you said, man.
Yeah. And to take it even a little bit deeper than that, like, this is why the idea of like measurement or record is very important in sport. Like, yes, we do need the objective. It shouldn't be the sole focus, but what it does is it gives us a yardstick or a measuring stick. And the ancient Greeks, they phrased it like this: like, when you break a record, you transcend not only your own limitation, but you transcend the limitations of what other people think is physically possible. You mentioned the 4-minute mile. That was a psychological barrier. People just didn't think it was possible, so nobody was able to do it. And then Sir Roger Bannister does it, and within a week, 2 other runners do it.
That's what's wild. Yep.
And now there's dozens of high schoolers who break it every single year, right? Yep. Like, because once one person does it, then the mystique is gone. And this actually relates to like the transcendent idea of the athlete. The ancient Greeks believed when you did this, you actually transcended your mortality. You actually moved into the divine realm, if only for like a brief moment in time, right? It's like a temporary moment of perfection, allows you to transcend the mortal world and to touch the fingertips of the gods, to reach into the eternal world, to reach to the divine. And then you bring that back with you. And that's the inspiration that shows people, oh my gosh, like, this guy just jumped longer than anybody's ever jumped before. What am I capable of doing right now? So when I use the word transcendence, like, it's based on this idea that the ancient Greeks gave us, that when we break a limitation that we never thought was physically possible, we actually do move forward the idea of human potential, not just for me, but for every single one of us.
Man. Yeah, that's a very cool way to look at it, man. How, it's like all of humanity. Because I always say too, whether that business, sports, whatever it is, if any other human's done it before, then I'm capable of doing it, right? If I'm willing to put in the work, or I'm willing to put in the, hire the people to get me there. I mean, that's how I grew on Twitter, man. Is like, I just saw Jack Colson, Zach Hommel, a few of these people doing it. And I'm like, well, look, if they can do it, I can do it too. I have a gap in knowledge. I might need to hire a coach. I might need to learn the things I need to learn, but if any other human's done it, I can do it. Right. And so you can take a lot of lessons away from that. I think that's what's really cool about that 4-minute mile, is it was such and I think that goes to show too, what Goggins talks about a lot, is like, when you think you hit the wall, you're usually at about like 40%, somewhere in there. You've got a long way to go, man, that your mind is trying to get you to quit long before your body does. And it sounds like that's what takes place on a lot of those runs out in the ice for you too, man.
Yes. Yeah. You're not even really running at that point. You're just sort of quickly moving across the ground and trying not to fall. Right. It's like, those aren't the times for speed. Those are the times for making sure you survive, and that you get a little thrill along the way. Right. Like, you don't need the objective measure at the end to necessarily tell you that you're doing something harder, depending on how creative you want to be. That's another thing that I love about sport, is it speaks to our creativity as people. Like, it's not just follow the rules, do what the coach says, right? Like, yes, it is, but only if you care about the outcome. Or not even that you care about the outcome. If the outcome is the most important thing to you, well, then yeah, you're going to turn yourself into a robot to achieve it. But sport, to me, is a spiritual endeavor. Like, it belongs to the world of religion. It came out of the world of religion. It relates to our characters and our moral foundations. So for me, it really is this place for our spirits to soar. And what do our spirits want? Freedom, creativity, passion, imagination, novelty, right? So part of the reason why I like to go out and do these ridiculous winter runs is because nobody else is doing them. I just went out one day and was like, let's give it a try. And I really quite enjoyed it. But I never would have if I wasn't open to a new experience, if I wasn't creative and thinking about different ways that I can get outside and be active in the winter. And then that grew into a passion where now I'm willing to, what I do, like the longest I was out last year, I did a 3 hour and 30-minute trail run out on the out in there. I was in, and here's how it works. I was inspired by Dylan Spina, because that was the day that Dylan Spina was running a 100-kilometer race. And he had never run, before he started training for this, he had never run more than 6 miles at one time in his life. And him and I, we were becoming really close friends at this time. So we were talking a lot, and I was helping him with some of this training that he was doing out on the trails. And so I was like, if Dylan is going to go out and throw himself into this incredible fire, I'm motivated to go do something big myself. And I'm going to do it on the day that he does it, so that I can share a little bit of what he's doing, right? So I know he was out there for something like 17 hours or whatever on his day. So my 3.5 wasn't really much compared to him, but it's that idea of just like wanting to rise a little bit above just like what the body experiences, to really gain the true value of the difficult experiences that sport can give you. And I just firmly believe that's in the spiritual, that's in the divine, that's in the religious realm.
That's so awesome. I can't tell you how many times it's transcended for me over the years, where I might be at the gym and I can literally have an image come into my head of a Kobe Bryant quote, or him diving on the floor, or a JJ Watt putting in the extra rep and talking about it. And like, it just makes me want to go harder. These guys will never know me, but I can get inspired from that. And I think it does transcend sort of time, spirit, man. That's awesome. Well, brother, I could sit here and chat with you about sports probably for another 7 days and not even eat or not even think about anything else straight. But at some point I gotta go do the fatherhood, the dad thing here and hop off. But I really appreciate you coming on, man. I'm grateful for you sharing. I hope other people found this as beneficial as I did. Again, guys, we're going to link everything Jordan does below: his website, his Twitter. He's an amazing follow on Twitter. You guys gotta give him a follow, man. And any last words for the people, Jordan?
Be athletic, man. Like that's it. It doesn't have to be, athleticism isn't necessarily what you think it is. It's just the idea of combining body and mind and spirit together, and just aiming at the best version of yourself once you've done that. And that's relative to each individual. Don't compare yourself to anybody else. Do something hard for you, do something that's challenging. But my biggest piece of advice is move in a way that you love, and move in a way that brings beauty into your life, beauty and truth into your life. Because that's when you're really going to see the difference between going through the motions and feeling alive through your body. Like, remember what it felt like when you were a kid, just playing sports with your friends, unorganized, whatever, making up your own sports, dreaming and believing that you're the stars that you see on TV. That's what I preach. Get that feeling inside of you however you can. For a lot of us, that's playing a sport. It's not doing exercise. I personally hate exercise. I do not like calisthenics. I do not like lifting. I do those things so that I can continue to trail run, which is my true love. Like, when I'm on the trails, my spirit is soaring and I'm free, and I love every element. I love the way I have to run. I love the way my body feels. I love the challenge. I just love all the things that go into it. So it's easy for me to go and lift some weights, right? Or do the routine exercises that I don't want to do, or I wouldn't have no motivation to do without trail running and golf. Golf is my other love.
Maybe we can get around in at some point if you're ever in Vegas, man. I haven't played in many years because my kids, just, it's a time thing, but I was very addicted to golf about 7-8 years ago, man. It's a fun sport too. I love that too. That's a good point to end on, how it's not a one size fits all. I think if you love to dance, man, turn on some music and dance every day. If yoga really fuels your soul, do some yoga every day. If lifting is where you feel alive, go do that. I love lifting weights. My wife can't stand it, man. So you know what she does? She puts on headphones and praise music. She goes for runs 6-7 miles a day, and that makes her feel alive. And so, these people that tell you gotta lift weights, you gotta do this, you gotta do, no, man, find things that you do that involve movement and health and do more of those things. That's the way it's going to be sustainable, right?
Preach. Start with love.
That's right, man. Amen. Start with love. Well, guys, love yourself today. Go love your fellow man. Be kind to everybody. Lift others up. And let's go have the greatest day of your lives. Thanks again for tuning in to Tyrompers No Limit Podcast. It's been episode 62 with my man, Jordan Goldstein. Give this guy a follow. He's a champion. I hope you appreciated him as much as I do. Thanks, and go have a great day.